Hello and welcome to WION's Global Leadership Series. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. The crisis in Afghanistan has exposed the global leadership. Desperate Afghans are still trying to get out of their country. There are some countries who actively want to take them in, who are helping them. One of them is Kosovo. It has stepped in to help the United States and process some of the Afghan refugees who were lucky enough to leave. Why did Kosovo decide to help the Afghans? Has the global leadership completely abandoned Afghanistan? And what does this breakdown mean for global institutions? To discuss this and a lot more, I'm joined by Vjosa Osmani, the president of Kosovo. Vjosa Osmani, welcome to WION.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
As we speak, we know that a major international crisis is playing out. The Taliban have taken complete control of Afghanistan, triggering a refugee crisis, among other things. And Kosovo, like I said in my introduction, has decided to host some of the Afghan refugees. How is your government trying to help them?
Well, first and foremost, we believe that this is a moral obligation. We have been refugees ourselves during the 90s, and we are alive today because the world did not turn their backs on us. We were helped by democratic countries around the world, and Kosovo refugees were taken in by so many countries, from the United States to New Zealand, every continent, to be more exact. Now, 22 years after the war in Kosovo, when Kosovo is moving forward as a democratic nation and it's prospering and thriving, we believe that it's a moral obligation to help those in need, in this case, the Afghan refugees. Secondly, as you know, there is an international law obligation not to close doors to refugees, according to the International Convention on Refugees. And as a country, as a member of the international community, of course, we want to respect these international obligations. And third, as I've pointed out in many statements so far, we want to stand by our ally, the United States of America, and to help the international community to cope with this human tragedy that is going to, of course, touch in so many ways the lives of the Afghan citizens. We're quite a small country, however, with a big heart, and we want to show that this is the right way to move ahead when people in need a place as a safe shelter, as a safe haven.
It's interesting to hear you, President Osmani, because at a time when most countries do not even honor legal obligations, you're talking about having a moral obligation towards these refugees. And I understand that this is not just a political decision for you. It has a personal dimension. You yourself have experienced what the Afghans are going through. You left Albania for Kosovo as a refugee. How did you feel when you first saw the heartbreaking scenes from Kabul?
These are truly heartbreaking scenes for every Kosovo citizen. Just to put everything into perspective, Kosovo has about 1.7 million citizens, and during the war, about 1 million of us were forced to leave our homes. Many were IDPs, internally displaced persons, but most were refugees in the countries around. And then from those countries around, whether Albania, Montenegro, or Macedonia, they were taken to other countries who opened their doors for us. United States, Canada, all the way, as I said, to Australia and New Zealand, but practically most of the world opened their doors to us. So we truly feel the pain, although there's no political comparison between the situation in Afghanistan and what happened in Kosovo. My country, the people of my country were subject to a genocidal regime, the Milosevic genocidal regime from Serbia. We have paid a very heavy price for the freedom and independence that we enjoy today. But this puts us in a situation to really understand the human suffering of those who are fleeing from terror, from repression, and from these difficult situations that the Afghan citizens are facing now under the new rule from the Taliban. We absolutely understand the human suffering, which is why we want to do our part in helping. Obviously, our capacities are limited, but as much as they are, we're going to put them in the service of helping these people who need now, not just Kosovo, but they need all of us. They need India, they need the United States, they need every democratic country that believes in democratic values.
From a refugee to a president, you yourself have come a long way, and I want you to share your journey with our viewers for them to help understand that it's not easy to be in situations like this, but there's always light at the end of the tunnel.
Kosovo has gone through decades of hardships. Under the Milosevic regime, when I was a little kid, we were not allowed to exercise any of the civil or political rights just because we were Albanians. And although we were over 90% of the population in Kosovo, all of these rights were denied, and we lived under an apartheid-like regime until the 1998-1999, when the war broke in Kosovo. So practically, we had no right to go to school. We had no right to speak our own language. We had no right to even deal with issues related to culture or sports. And all of these rights were denied. But despite of that, the peaceful resistance and later on the armed resistance of the people of Kosovo towards the genocidal regime of Milosevic was, together with the NATO allies, primarily the United States, what saved our lives. It has been an extremely difficult journey. Today in Kosovo, we still have almost 2,000 people that are missing from the war, buried in massive graves in Serbia, a country that is still not repenting, not apologizing, not putting the perpetrators before justice, and denying the genocide that it has committed, both in Kosovo as well as in Bosnia. For that reason, we're still facing difficulties and attempts for destabilization by Serbia. But for us, as the people of Kosovo, having paid a very heavy price for the freedom and independence that we enjoy today, we understand how important it is that we protect what we have today, what we have achieved, at any price. And of course, it is extremely important that at times like this, we also understand the pain of others, and we act as a responsible member of the international community. For me, as a president today, the experiences that I've had, just like any other citizen in Kosovo, were extremely painful. We saw hell with our own eyes during the 90s. And for those of us that were lucky enough to survive the war, it is an obligation to really move this country forward, to honor those who gave their lives for the freedom that we enjoy today. So it's not just the obligation that a president of another country would have to move a country forward. For me, it's beyond politics. It's also the obligation of a human being to fight for justice for those who lost their lives to a genocidal regime.
Right, your motivations are personal, moral, but there's always politics in the world of politics, of course. So your decision to host Afghan refugees has also sparked the controversy, I understand, and reports say that Kosovo is taking in the Afghans who have failed to clear the initial rounds of screening. Are you not concerned about the security implications of your decision?
In fact, there have been quite a lot of controversies around and I've read something in the media as well. However, the truth is this, and it has been clarified by the U.S. government as well. What we discussed with the U.S. institutions and what we had agreed is that the Afghan citizens would stay in Kosovo until they get the necessary visa applications that they have been applying for the United States finished. So this does not mean that they are actually terrorists or that they have links with the Taliban. No, that is not the truth. In fact, the truth is that there is an application that sometimes lasts longer, sometimes it's shorter. It really also depends in which category the citizens fall, whether they fall within the CIV category, which is the special visa immigrant applicants. They've started their procedure about a year ago, which is why they finished earlier. Then there's the P2 category, which is organizations, NGOs, and other US affiliated organizations. And for them, it takes a little longer because they only started now. And then there's the third category of other groups, for example, journalists or NGOs that would fight for women's rights and their families. And these, of course, again, they started really late, so the procedures last longer. So the truth is, it's simply there are different procedures and different time periods for different people and different categories. It has nothing to do with them being labeled as security concerns.
Is there a screening process in place to ensure that these are the people who may or may not have links with the Taliban? Because from what I have understood and what I have seen and heard from the US leadership is that they themselves can't be sure of a lot of the people who were taken out of Afghanistan.
There are two vetting procedures that are being done when it comes to the security of those that we receive in Kosovo. The first vetting procedure is done by the United States, and the second, before they arrive in Kosovo, and the second is done by the Kosovo institutions, by our own security institutions. Moreover, they are placed in two camps. One is the Bondsteel camp, and the security is provided by the U.S. Army, because as you know, we have a number of U.S. soldiers situated in Kosovo. And the second is another camp, the Bechtel camp, just close to the Bondsteel camp, which is used by NATO. And in that case, all of the security of the camp is organized by NATO forces. So compared to other countries where once they arrive, there's no security organized when it comes to the refugees who come in Kosovo, there are security measures in place even after they come in. So there's a double process of vetting. Furthermore, there's constant security when it comes to every citizen that arrives, organized both by the US forces, the NATO forces, as well as the Kosovo security institutions.
This refugee crisis is being called a result of the mismanaged and botched up withdrawal by the US and its allies. Do you agree with this assessment? Do you believe this humanitarian tragedy could have been avoided had the Western forces planned their exit better?
It is not up to me to actually evaluate the way the United States has built its exit strategy. We have excellent relations with the Biden administration, and what I can speak of is the support that we as Kosovo have received by the United States, both during the war as well as after the war in our state building process. There's no single success that we have achieved without the support of the United States. And today, all of the successes that we have are actually joint successes. I think instead of pointing the finger, it is important that now we join forces to help the people in need, and to see what we can do to the Afghans that either are now refugees or those who want to leave in the future, because my understanding is that there are many who are stranded in Afghanistan and who are trying to find ways to leave so that they can save their lives.
It is indeed, and I understand that the United States is a very important country for you. You've described the US as, quote unquote, the most important and a strategic ally of Kosovo. And while I agree that this is the time to join forces and do as much as can be done for the Afghans, it's also important to take lessons from the mistakes so that they're not repeated. Would you say that the Americans abandoned the Afghan people beyond a point?
I think it is important to see how the Afghan people themselves have reacted, especially the Afghan armed forces. Let me give you a comparison. In Kosovo, during the war, the Kosovo Liberation Army did not abandon the people of Kosovo. Quite the opposite. It took arms in order to fight the Milosevic regime so that it can protect the civilians who were unprotected. This cannot be put as a blame on one country or the other. In Kosovo, we have succeeded because both we, the people of Kosovo, fought together with our international allies. It was a joint fight. We cannot now put the blame on one country, especially one as the United States that has contributed for 20 years to build so much in Afghanistan, to build democracy, to build peace, to build justice, and at the same time to help them establish and strengthen their armed forces. So I think it is also upon the armed forces of Afghanistan and all those who wanted to fight the Taliban regime to have acted in this regard.
President Osmani, are you suggesting that the Afghan people did not fight enough for their own freedom?
No, I'm suggesting that the armed forces who were armed and prepared and trained, I'm not suggesting that all of the people had that job, but the armed forces, of course, should have fought, just like the Kosovo Liberation Army fought in Kosovo for the freedom of Kosovo. I'm talking specifically about the armed forces, not about all of the people. For a country to succeed, you need to have both the armed forces of that country together with the international allies to join forces to fight terror, to fight genocide, as it was in our case.
Right. The point is moot on how the Afghan forces reacted and why, but I don't want to digress from the conversation we're having here. The Taliban, we know, announced their cabinet, and 17 out of 33 cabinet members are on the United Nations terror blacklist. Would you say the return of the Taliban in power is essentially a failure of global efforts to rein in terror groups?
I think that the fight against terror has not ended. And even though the US and many other NATO members are not in Afghanistan right now, that does not mean that the fight against terror has stopped. However, there are many other ways that this fight can continue. And of course, it is important that just like when all of the democratic countries joined against ISIS, against Daesh, that we join forces again so that every country can do its own part in order to continue to fight terror.
Whether it's the pandemic or the crisis in Afghanistan, we've seen a pattern. Institutions like the United Nations have failed to mount a coordinated global response. A fractured global leadership, would you say, is creating more challenges for the world now?
I think that in the past couple of months, what we have seen is more of a transatlantic cooperation, which we didn't see a few years ago, which is quite promising for the world to see the United States sitting down with world leaders, whether from Europe or elsewhere in the world, and trying to find solutions for crises around the world. It's something that we need to see. And even small regions like ours, the Western Balkans, have shown, and history has shown, that whenever there is more transatlantic cooperation, there is more peace. Whenever it does not exist, obviously, as you said, whenever the international leadership is fractured, there's less success when it comes to places of crisis around the world. When it comes to the pandemic, we have been receiving support by countries around the world because we were the last country to start vaccinating. Unfortunately, we did not have vaccines. We just received about 500,000 doses from the United States at a very dire situation for our country when it comes to vaccination and quite a surge in infections. And unfortunately, we've been losing lives. And I want to take this opportunity to also express my condolences to everyone, every family that lost their loved ones in India as well, because I do know that you've been coping with quite a difficult situation. So the pandemic has shown how much we need one another. And it has shown, as you've heard it so many times, that unless we really fight this virus together and fight it everywhere, we're not going to be able to be successful even in our own country. There's so much interconnectivity, so much travel of the people around the world. And unless we really achieve an increase in vaccinations everywhere in the world, we're not going to be able to be successful in tackling it.
Absolutely. What happens in one part of the world impacts the rest because of the connectivity that you spoke about. You also talked about a unified response, but we understand that unified responses are possible, when you have uniformity of goals. And we've seen in the past couple of years, whether it's China's role in the pandemic or Pakistan's role in the instability in Afghanistan, these are questions that global institutions will have to address. Do you believe that these situations create instability and security issues, not just for the region, but for the world in general?
Well, we have absolutely seen the case with the pandemic, and China's reaction, of course, was one of the reasons why the rest of the world reacted so late when it comes to the virus. If the world had that information well ahead when China had it, obviously there would have been a response that would have been prepared months ago so that the world would have been ready when it comes to the first wave. Now, when it comes to the Delta variant, I think it is extremely important that everyone in the world draws lessons from the beginning of the pandemic. I think even though we've had this virus for about 1 year or so, there are so many lessons that we can draw from it, so that the world can sit down together and the democratic countries around the world can sit down together and try to at least prevent new variants of the virus, because it's going to be extremely dangerous if we have other variants that are spreading so fast as the Delta variant or the one that we're hearing of right now, the new variant. So lessons to be learned, there are a lot, but at the same time, I think we have also learned that unless we help each other with the virus, we will not be able to cope with the pandemic.
How do you view Pakistan's role in Afghanistan?
It is, again, one thing that I've learned when listening to other people in the world and other leaders in the world talking about what happened in Kosovo is that you should not jump into conclusions when it comes to places that are geographically distant and when you don't really know all of the details about how the role of each and every country is. Pakistan has recognized Kosovo some time ago, and we've established diplomatic relations, but it is not up to me to evaluate their role when it comes to the regional developments over there.
Right. So you've been pushing for the normalization of ties with neighbors like Serbia, and your government has initiated a dialogue and held at least 3 meetings with representatives of Serbia. Where do things stand at the moment?
As you know, it is extremely important for peace and stability in the region that Serbia comes to reality with the fact that Kosovo is independent, sovereign, and it will continue to do so. We're going to stay here as sovereign and independent within the current territory. This is a reality that is not going to change. The faster Serbia recognizes, the better for its own people, for its own future, European future, as well as for our region. So we've been ready to sit down in this dialogue table. We're extending our hand of cooperation, although Serbia never apologized for the crimes that it has committed towards our people. And we've been extremely constructive in this dialogue. We're actively engaging with new proposals that will make the relations between the two countries much better. However, there is one thing that relates to what I said earlier that is a precondition, and that is justice. Justice is what we are insisting on. The very first topic that we're insisting on finding a solution on is the missing persons. There are almost 2,000 people that Serbia is not telling the whereabouts of. There are somewhere in massive graves in Serbia. So we need to know that information so that the parents in Kosovo can have their kids back, their loved ones. So this is a very urgent issue for us, and I think it would really step up the efforts for a final agreement between Kosovo and Serbia. Final agreement must be on mutual recognition. Otherwise, anything less than that is not going to be a final agreement. It's just going to be an attempt of Serbia to postpone things for another 20 years and to continue to destabilize the region. There have been 3 meetings between the leaders of Kosovo and Serbia. In all of these meetings, Kosovo has gone forward constructively with proposals that would contribute to peace and stability in our region. Serbia simply rejects everything, which shows that they have no interest in peace in our region. However, it is about time that the international community, especially the European Union, is clear with Serbia on the fact that they cannot sit on 2 chairs at once. They need to pick whether they want to move forward with their European Union integration or they want to work with Russia exclusively. So this is something that, of course, we hope the international community will be loud and clear on when it comes to Serbia. But as Kosovo, we're very interested to conclude this process as soon as possible so that we can all together contribute to more stability in our region.
Let's talk about India's relationship with Kosovo. New Delhi, we know, does not recognize Kosovo as an independent nation. In 2011, American embassy cables released by WikiLeaks revealed that the US was trying to pressurize India to recognize Kosovo's independence, but India declined because it feared that such a recognition could have implications in Kashmir. What's your view on India's position?
We, of course, once again call upon the Indian government to, first of all, recognize the suffering of the people of Kosovo from the Milosevic genocidal regime. To secondly, recognize the reality in the ground that is not going to change. It's just a matter of time when countries like India will join other democratic countries around the world in recognizing the sovereign, independent Republic of Kosovo. And thirdly, call upon the Indian government to recognize what the International Court of Justice said. The International Court of Justice, which is the UN court, the World Court, has explicitly provided that the independence of Kosovo is in line with international law. And it has also clarified that it is a sui generis case that does not compare to any other place around the world that is seeking recognition. So the specificities of how Kosovo became independent make it so different with other regions like Kashmir. It is extremely important for us that we have healthy and active ties with the Indian government, with the Indian people. There are so many opportunities, from economic cooperation to cooperation in politics, diplomacy, and other area. And I do hope that we're going to have a chance to at least meet so that the Indian officials can hear our side of the story. It's a story of suffering, perseverance, but also immense hope for the future. Kosovo has never been the reason of wars, the reason of instability. Quite the opposite. We have been pushing for stability, we have been contributing to it, and it is simply a people that deserves freedom after fighting for it for decades and decades, and after losing so many of our beloved people so that we can have the freedom and independence that we enjoy today. I'm sure that you know most of India's allies around the world have already recognized Kosovo. The best argument in this case is what the International Court of Justice has said. And these are judges that decide without any political pressure or any bias when it comes to which country they come from. So many of those judges came from countries that did not recognize Kosovo, like Brazil, let's say, but they voted in favor because the legal arguments are in favor and because the situations are extremely different from situations in Kashmir or elsewhere in the world. I think by recognizing Kosovo, they would be exactly giving the message that Kosovo cannot be compared to other territories in the world. But in fact, our political, historical, and legal arguments are all in favor of recognizing Kosovo, just the same way that they have recognized Croatia, they have recognized Slovenia, they have recognized countries like Bosnia, Montenegro, Macedonia, North Macedonia, and others. Kosovo is no different. We are free and independent today, and I truly hope that we can sit down with the Indian government so that we can discuss how we can enhance our relations.
Do you have any engagement with the government of India?
Not for the moment, but I really do hope that this will happen very soon. We are trying to reach out, and I do hope that we will have a positive response. I think listening to one's argument is the least that anyone should do, and simply listening to our side of the story, which is the truth that has been confirmed by international courts, is something that we hope to be able to tell to the Indian government.
Right. President Vjosa Osmani, thanks very much for speaking to us here on WION.
Thank you for having me.